Hello and welcome to Insights, the podcast with your host, Joe Pane. Join me in this deep exploration of our personal journeys from ambition to meaning, where we stop living life fast and start living life deep. This is a journey of waking up and realizing that our lives have never been about us, but about others. True success leaves positive ripple effects on other souls. I believe that success needs to be redefined from our own personal ambitious endeavors to be redefined as the value that we leave and give to others around us. Join me now as we begin this journey to deeper connections, even more fulfillment, some fun, curiosity, life, love, and all good things. Your deeper journey from ambition to meaning starts right now. Hey everyone, it's Joe here. Welcome to episode 33. And today we're looking at the fascinating topic of the wisdom of quitting. And I've had this conversation, or I've presented actually a series of little mini workshops over the last couple of weeks on exactly this topic to a range of different business owners and different people from different industry. And so this is an important conversation, I believe, because I've been on my path around the emotional fitness space now for the better part of 14 years. And I know that when I first started living this kind of dream, like following my passion, I guess you could say, following my soul, following my heart, I remember when I started the first year or two, there were many, many occasions where I was tempted to quit, where I was fantastically attracted to going back to an old job or to regain the security of what I had earlier with a monthly salary that was known well in advance. So I want to talk about this today because I think there's a fascinating insight I want to share with you from the realms of human behavior in terms of understanding how to know when it's time to quit. You know, in the famous words of Kenny Rogers, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. I almost went into song there, but I'd be really destroying the experience of this podcast if you heard me go into song. So, so really, it's understanding, well, how do we know? How do we know when it's right to quit something? How do we know when it's wrong, when we're just defying ourselves? How do we know if we're tempted to quit on a dream or a career or a relationship? How do we know if that reaction is fear-based versus, based in true wisdom, that it is the right decision to make? So this is not talking. I'm not talking here about whether quitting is a good thing or a bad thing, because quitting can be a good thing and quitting can be a bad thing. I mean, to give you an example of quitting as a good thing, when was it? 2018, I think it was, when I was running one of my marathons. It was the first marathon out of 7 that I've completed that I didn't actually complete. That I didn't that was the 8th. That would have been the 8th one, but I didn't complete it because at the 25 kilometer mark, I had issues with my lower leg. And could I have kept running? Yes. Would I have absolutely done damage over the next 16, 17 kilometers that were left in the race? Most definitely. So it was like, well, what do I do here? Do I keep pushing through and be tough so I can say to my running mates that I did the marathon? Or do I pull the pin because I've got nothing to prove to myself or to anyone else? I had already done 6 marathons up until that point. So what am I trying to prove here? So I pulled the pin, and I don't quit on things very often, but that was a decision that was based on long-term thinking. It was also letting go of the need to prove anything, and it was also being prepared to be misunderstood. Now, what's interesting is that in retrospect, as I do look back on that decision, I'm very, very glad that I did that, because on the other hand, there was a fellow runner who had a similar kind of injury, except in another part of her body. I think it was in her foot. And she felt this pain and she kept pushing through because her philosophy is you never quit. You never quit, right? So this is the point of this conversation, is knowing when to quit and when quitting is a good thing and when it's not. So she pushed through. She did one of her slowest times, just like I would have done my slowest time. And she's barely run since. And we're talking the year 2018. And as of the time of this recording, we're in the middle of 2020. because of the damage done to her body, because of the fact that she just pushed through to complete that marathon, because that was her philosophy. Now, it might sound like I'm judging her. Maybe I am, but all I know is my own philosophy and my own inner world, and that is that sometimes you just got to know when you're just going down the wrong path. So, but let me make this conversation with you really valuable here to give you some insight here. So, to know whether to quit on something, to quit on a career, quit on a journey, quit on a dream, quit on a business, or even in a relationship, we've got to reconnect back to the reason why we got into that career or that business in the first place, why we got into that relationship in the first place. And I trust that where I'm going to take you now, I hope this is very valuable, because certainly the feedback I've received in sharing this insight I'm about to share with you has been extremely useful in clarifying for clients whether they should keep on going with something, whether they should exit something. So I think I've asked this question I'm about to ask you to probably it'd be just over 100 people now in the last couple of weeks. And the question is, so why do you do what you do? So if you're thinking of quitting on your dreams or your career or your relationship, why did you get into that business or that career or that relationship in the first place? Now, let me tell you, out of 100 people, there was probably about 70 or 80 different responses in terms of reasons why people got into that career or business. The context of which I asked the question to those 100 people was based more along the lines of their careers and their business. So everyone had a different reason, which is expected, ranging from it's my passion to money to pragmatic reasoning, through to emotional reasons, through to values reasons, a whole host of different reasons. And what I shared with everyone was that that's true, that you got into it for that reason, whatever that reason was. But fundamentally, we all do what we do for one sole purpose, for one sole reason. And that reason is so we can grow, Our soul is defined or not defined. Well, it can be defined, but it's designed. That's the word I was looking for. Is our soul is designed to perpetually grow. Everything in the universe is either expanding or shrinking. Everything, from economies to money to everything in nature, to relationships, to career opportunities, everything, all markets, everything is expanding or shrinking. Nothing stays still. So the reason why you and I got into whatever it is that we're into in the first place was so we could grow. Now, the thing is this, that decision was unconscious. I didn't get into, when I left my job 14 years ago and started my consultancy coaching business, I wasn't thinking I'm doing this so I can grow. I was doing it because it was something that excited me and still does to this day for completely different reasons these days. But there was a passion about it. Sure, that was my logical reasoning, my conscious reasoning to get into what I'm doing for a living. But I didn't consciously think I'm getting into this to grow. I didn't consciously think when I entered into my relationship with my wife that I'm getting into this to grow. I didn't choose to be a father so I could grow. This is all unconscious. For some of us, it might be conscious, but for most of us, it's unconscious. But if you really think about it, the reason why you engaged in that challenge of having that business, starting that career, getting to that, whatever it might be, right, is that the unconscious driver that you got into that was to grow. Now, this goes to another layer. This goes to a whole nother layer. And that is that for growth to be real, for growth to actually happen, there has to be another precursor, another seed that grows into growth, no pun intended, that becomes growth. That seed, that precursor, that prerequisite that is fundamentally needed in order to grow is uncertainty, Now, here's where the rubber is hitting the road with what we're talking about here today, the wisdom of quitting. Quite often, people will quit on a business or a career when uncertainty is high. Is that when all people quit? No, absolutely not. People quit for different reasons. People quit because they're bored. That's a whole nother, and that's all linked back to the growth thing. And I'll take you back to growth in a moment. But let me just talk about uncertainty for a sec. The precursor to all growth is uncertainty. And sometimes people want to quit on something because the uncertainty is intense, or we're experiencing an acute dose of it. So when I first started my journey back in 2006 into this journey, My year of 2006 and 2007 was absolutely riddled, racked, filled with uncertainty because everything I was doing I hadn't done before. Everything was brand spanking new. Going out and networking, establishing relationships, the skill itself of speaking, coaching, human behavior, learning, everything was riddled in uncertainty. Everything was unknown. So it was because of that acuteness, that intensity of that uncertainty, that I was fantastically entertaining the idea of actually going back to an old job because I was craving certainty. I was craving some kind of familiarity. And thankfully, I didn't make that decision to quit. I kept going. I would show up to my next appointment that I had dedicated myself to or committed myself to, and on went the journey so I could grow. Uncertainty is a precursor to all growth. Now, just a moment ago, I just said, well, you might have quit something in the past because you were bored. Now, listen to that very carefully, because that means that if you were bored, it means that you had stopped growing. That particular vehicle, whatever that experience was, had no growth left in it. Now, the thing is, there's a wisdom to that as well, because is that true, that there's no growth left in that particular relationship or that particular business or that particular career? We really need to be honest with ourselves about whether that's true or not. So let me give you an example. In 2005, when I quit my last job that I ever had as an employee, was a wonderful time that I had with these particular people. It was just a wonderful time. I was there for 7 years. I loved the first 5 years. The last 2 years, I was getting stale and bored. And I remember having a conversation about opportunities of expansion. In other words, I spoke with my employer and I asked, are there any other roles that I can expand into here? Can I go into profit share with you? Can I become a leader of the team? In other words, I was entertaining all of these other ideas of other roles and responsibilities that I could take on so I could grow. Now, I wasn't conscious. I remember this. I don't remember thinking. I wasn't consciously thinking I want to do that so I could grow. I was just thinking that because I thought I'm kind of bored of doing the same old, same old. I was doing the same thing week in, week out for 5 of those, well, 7 years all up, but for 5 years, loved it. But all the growth had been tapped out. Like there was nothing left in that role for me. So the wisdom of quitting there was the right decision, because any which way I turned, there was no further opportunity. So everywhere that I asked in that company, in that client, with that employer, when I was asking whether I could expand into this role, that role, this role, there was no other further options. There were options, but not to the degree that would sustain long-term growth for me as a person, to grow my spirit, grow my skills, grow my experience. So I left and I went into something completely different that had incredible growth. Now, I've been, as I said, 14, 15 years into this journey, and I'm still growing today. Am I growing at the same intensity of my first couple of years? No, I'm not. But am I still expanding and growing? Absolutely, in completely different ways to how I was growing in my first year or two. So the point I want to make, guys, is that the wisdom of quitting is the way that you know whether you're making the decision to whether you're quitting for the right reasons. What is the right reason? The right reason is that genuinely within that relationship or within that career or within that business, that there is genuinely no more growth to be had. If growth is all tapped out, genuinely for real, and you're really honest with that, then it's time to move on. Perhaps, more than likely, I'll say it's time to move on. In most situations, so if you're really, really, really bored in a particular part of your life that you want to quit on that particular part of your life, then the honesty comes into as, well, hold on, am I bored because I'm not committing and I'm not really giving it a really red hot go? Or am I bored because genuinely in this particular experience, I've done everything that's possible to be done, so it's time to move on? Does that make sense? So you've got to have that wisdom. Wisdom is to me means awareness, pure awareness of this. So in some instances, there's no more growth, you move on. But in a lot of instances, there is a creative way to keep expanding, to keep growing, to change, to evolve, to redefine, whatever it might be. And that's the wisdom of quitting. The wisdom of quitting is understanding that the unconscious reason why you got into that thing in the first place was so you could grow. The fundamental prerequisite to all growth is uncertainty. You've got to walk through the doorway called uncertainty in order to grow. I don't know of any growth without uncertainty. I mean, everything in nature demonstrates this. From the classic metaphorical story of the butterfly, caterpillar to butterfly, it's got to break through the uncertainty of the cocoon and the strength that it takes to do that, to break into a new level of existence. The seedling coming out of the ground, out of the dirt, it's breaking through to a new level of existence. It's growth. Everything is that's the uncertainty. That's the challenge. I guess challenge is another word for uncertainty. So that's the fundamentals of the wisdom of quitting, is asking yourself the question, why did I get into this in the first place? Reconnect to that reason. That reason more than likely will be linked to an unconscious reason back then, which was to grow. The precursor to all growth is uncertainty. And if you can stir up challenge, variety, adventure, uncertainty in your current situation of what you're thinking of quitting on, if you can stir that up and grow more, perhaps it's time to stay and keep committing and keep growing and keep expanding. I trust and hope this is making sense, because the reason why I bring this up is because this whole philosophy of the wisdom of quitting is because I had a client about a month ago who was thinking of, quitting this passion of theirs. And I had this conversation with him, and this gave him clarity to understand that the intense dose of uncertainty that they were experiencing was inducing fear in them. The intense uncertainty was bringing up a fear of, am I enough to see this through? Can I handle this? Can I trust myself to handle this? And it was a fear-based reaction to that fear that was causing them to seriously tempt themselves to quit. So when I explained it like this, it became clearer why they were experiencing what they were experiencing, and that the very reason of why they got into that particular journey in the first place is still there, to grow, and they're growing like you wouldn't believe. So I trust that is absolutely making sense to you, and that this insight has given you some clarity around the wisdom of knowing when to hold them, knowing when to fold them, knowing when to walk away, and knowing when to run, as Kenny Rogers says in The Gambler. All right, bless his soul, R.I.P. So that's a wrap for today. I trust you enjoyed episode 33, The Wisdom of Quitting. Share this with other people. Subscribe also if you can. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to the podcast, because that means it gets ranked more organically and naturally. I don't know all the techno reasons for it, but my mentor says, tell them to subscribe, Joe. It's a good thing for your podcast. So I'm just saying, do that. If you haven't given this podcast a 5-star rating yet, and you genuinely believe it's a 5-star podcast, I would love for you to go to Apple Podcasts and rate away. Really excited to continue this journey with you through 2020, as we are now seeing the light at the end of this tunnel that we've been in for the last 10, 11, 12 weeks, and looking forward to continuing this wonderful journey with you. I trust you enjoyed The Wisdom of Quitting, episode 33, and wherever you may be, enjoy your morning, enjoy your afternoon, enjoy your evening, and I'll see you soon for the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you. I'm Joe Pane, and you've been listening to Insights, the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you're thoroughly loving the journey of these messages, please feel more than welcome to leave a review, and be sure to leave a comment on what you've been learning and how useful this has been to you, and how you've been sharing this with those around you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm looking forward to being with you again very soon in the next episode of Insights, the podcast.